Have you told your friends that you see ghosts?
Oh, absolutely not.
Gina Rodriguez returns in Not Dead Yet.
I'm back, baby.
Who is that?
Oh, she's the obituary writer.
And Brad Garrett joins the brilliant ensemble cast.
Titan, Maverick, Titan of all Mavericks. These are all words used to describe me.
Not Dead Yet. Season premiere. Tonight, 8:30, 7:30 Central on ABC. And stream on Hulu.
It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Children have got this really highly attuned, I'm going to call it a fairness antenna.
It's funny you say that
Yeah.
because Emily's teacher last year talked about Emily's highly tuned in sense of social justice.
Right.
I think it was a really nice way of her saying that everything felt unfair to Emily.
Well, that was the word I was going to use. Like, kids keep track. They know the score. And if someone's got privileges that they don't have, there's only one word for it. From the kids' mouths, they say...
It's just so
unfair. So I jumped onto Facebook about a week ago and said, what is it that your kids can't do that everyone else apparently can? What is it that makes your kids say, oh, that's so unfair? And the reason that I did it was because we got a message via email, podcasts@happyfamilies.com.au, podcasts with an S at happyfamilies.com.au. Somebody who wanted to remain anonymous sent us an email and said, why does everyone else get to do it? Recently, my first grader came home from school using swear words. And we had to sit down and have a discussion about what those words were and why kids shouldn't be using them. During the chat, my son mentioned that he learnt the phrase from a friend and his friend's parents allowed him to use those words at home and at school and wherever else. This mum said, my real feeling on this is standards are different across households. And it's important for my kids to understand why we do things a certain way without my child passing judgment on schoolmates who do things different ways. Justin and Kylie, do you have any ways that you can help us to navigate this conversation through the years? I know it's the first of many. From this to cell phones to curfew one day, I would really love to get your thoughts. So I put it on Facebook, like I said, and just said, what is it that you guys are struggling with that your kids want to do that everyone else can do except for them? And these were some of the voice memos that you sent us via podcasts@happyfamilies.com.au.
For years, we had the discussion with particularly my daughter about when she'd be allowed a mobile phone, because all her friends had mobile phones, particularly when she started high school. And we're pretty strict about stuff like that and really didn't want her to have a mobile phone until she was at least 14. And it was quite a difficult situation because a lot of her friends did have phones, but we stuck at her guns and explained all the reasons behind it and managed to get to 13 before we gave her one.
Some of the questions we've had lately in the house is one of my daughters wants to be on Snapchat. All her friends are. That's how they interact socially. And another one is she doesn't like going to the swimming club and none of her friends are going. She's like, oh, I'll be all by myself.
The most recent one for us has been around friends. So they're 6 and 7 year olds allowed to watch M-rated movies. And we've talked about the fact that as the mum, as the parents, our job is to be the gatekeepers for our kids and to help protect them in their mind, their eyes, what they see, what they hear, and help to protect their spirits. And so that's why we don't allow them to watch things, because there's things in the world where it's not appropriate for kids or it desensitizes kids to horrible things that can happen out in the world.
Really appreciate you sending those through. We love having your voices on the podcast. This is clearly an issue.
I'm just reading through some of the Facebook comments that were made.
It kind of went a bit bonkers.
Michelle said the conversation in their house was all over sleepovers, TikTok, Snapchat and curfews. Samita had an even longer list of it's unfair. Everyone else is doing it from her 10-year-old. These included, why can't I have a sleepover? Why can't I have Roblox? Why can't I stay up past 10 p.m.? Why can't I have school lunch orders every day because I already spend over $500 on groceries? Why can't I ride my bike after 7 p.m.? Why can't I have Coke or soft drink? Is this not every parent's life?
I love this.
Julie from North Queensland said no screens in the bedroom for her teens. It's so unfair. And Abby in Northern Ireland identifies social media for her under 13-year-old being a problem.
All my 11-year-old friends have got social media, even though the rules are 13. So here's how to respond. I want to walk through, there's a lot here, but I want to walk through what we can do regardless of the situation when the kids are saying everyone else gets to do it. The old school way, what my parents would have said to me was, I don't care what happens in their house. In my house, this is what we do.
That's exactly right.
And do you know what? In some ways, I'm a little bit sympathetic to that. Like, part of me wants to say there is a place for that. And maybe every now and again, as a tired, exhausted parent who doesn't want to have to validate everything and be gentle all the time, I get it. But there is a better way forward.
What I love about our anonymous emailer is just that acknowledgement that she wants her child to understand the why.
And she wants
that's what we're missing from the previous generation.
Yeah. But I also love how she said, I don't want my child to be thinking that because we've got different standards that we're somehow better. I remember, so we're a non-smoking family. And I remember with our younger kids, we really worked hard to drill into them that smoking was not healthy. It wasn't a good option. But at one point, I remember having a conversation with one of those kids. I won't identify her, but she saw somebody smoking and she made a judgment about the person. And I realized that we had been so fervent in our desire to make sure our kids didn't smoke that she thought that therefore if you smoked that you were bad
person.
Yeah. And so I had to sort of walk that back and say, there are very, very good people in the world who choose to smoke, and that's their decision. It's just that it's really unhealthy, but that doesn't make you a bad person. And trying to distinguish, hang on, so if their standards are different than mine, that doesn't necessarily make them a bad person. It's a really important thing to distinguish. So let's dive into a handful of ideas that can be useful on how to respond. I think the number one thing that we want to do, this is my favorite thing to do when the kids say, it's so unfair, is I agree with them. I don't agree that it's unfair, but I agree with their desire. So I'm not agreeing that it's going to be okay for them to do that thing that they want to do. What I'm essentially saying when I say agree with their desire or agree with them is I'm saying, you look at your child when they say, it's so unfair and why can't I do that? And you're essentially saying, I get it. I get it. You might even say, when I was a kid, I wanted to do a bunch of stuff and my parents wouldn't let me either. And I thought it was so unfair too. Like, I really do get it. And what you're doing is you're validating that vision. It helps them to know that you understand, at least in part, how they feel. So you might say something like this, oh, being allowed to do that like everyone else would make you feel so much better about life. Am I right?
When I listen to you say this, the visual that comes to my mind is getting down to your child's level.
Yeah.
This is a metaphorical getting down to your child's level. Eye to eye, you're no longer the big person in the room. You actually are seeing life through their eyes.
So to be clear, no agreement, just recognition and validation.
As you go from agreeing with their desire, the opportunity there to be empathetic to their feelings makes such a difference because they feel like you actually understand how they're feeling.
So if I was to use an empathy statement, what I'd say is something like, it just feels really tough when you see everyone else getting to do stuff and we're saying no. And it's just describing what they're feeling. It's not agreeing with them, but it's taking it that next step further. First of all, you've said, oh, don't you just wish being allowed to do that like everyone else would just make you feel so much better about life? And it's so tough when they're all doing it and we're saying no. I get that. That's the idea behind that empathy thing. I'm really glad that you sort of extended what I was saying to go there.
So get curious, not furious. This is one of your little Justinisms. You use it all the time, but it's so powerful. We can get really frustrated because our kids feel like they are entitled to everything that everyone else has. But this is an opportunity for us to actually get really curious as to why this is so important to them.
We don't usually want to lean in when the kids are being bratty. We just want to say, look, just deal with it. I've said no, I'm tired of this conversation. But when we lean right in, when we understand rather than reprimand, when we explore rather than explode, when we get curious, not furious, we're just listening to understand. We're not worrying about replying. We're not worried about winning. We're just listening to understand. And it's really interesting when we do this. Like, sometimes the kids have got really good arguments.
I was about to say, I don't think there's ever been a time where I've sat down with my kids and really got curious about why it was they were pushing so hard against us that I haven't gone, I really get it.
Yes.
I really, really understand why this is so important to
And you're
me.
not just listening with your head, you're listening with your heart. So you're trying to feel what they're feeling at the same time that you're trying to see things through their eyes.
The word that comes to my mind is compassion.
Right.
We're actually coming from a place of compassion. We want to understand and we want to sit in that place with them.
Once you've done that, it makes it really easy as well to start to explain. And you want to do this fairly briefly and very gently, especially if they're emotional. But if you give your kids a clear rationale, when they're saying, but this and but that, and you can really listen to it, you can say, okay, I get it. Let me explain to you why this matters. We don't swear because, or we don't do Roblox because, or we don't have sleepovers because, or we're keeping you off social media till you're this age because. And then you can step in with a really clear rationale for why you're saying this is my standard.
I'm going to one-up you on this.
Yeah, radio go.
I think it's better that we ask them.
Yes.
Why they think we would be concerned about this, or why we are at this point in time saying no. When we do that, they're the ones talking and their brains are working. Did I one-up you? I can't believe you didn't think of that.
I was actually going to say that. That was the next part of this, okay? Because I've been saying that in parenting workshops often, because once we start lecturing, the kids' eyes glaze over.
They don't want me to tell them why.
Exactly.
Because they know why.
They usually know why anyway. Yeah. So when we say, what do you think my concerns are? Or maybe, something like, as a parent, my primary concern is to make sure that you're safe and that you're making choices that are appropriate for your age and for your development. I want to make sure that you're safe and healthy. Why do you think I'd be worried about this?
There's been a handful of times we've sat down with our kids and they've given us a list of things that they think, and they haven't even touched on the real issues that we have.
And then we just fill in the gaps.
And we're able to fill in the gaps. Yeah. But they've done some thinking. And another great question that we've used over the years, which I think is even more powerful, if this was your 16-year-old daughter, if this was your 10-year-old, what would you say?
If you were the parent. It's a big perspective-taking thing, and the kids usually go, oh, fine. Or what would you say if it was...
Unless you're me, because when I was growing up, my parents will tell me even today that I sat there and said, well, when I have children of my own, I will let them do whatever they want to do when they want to do it.
So there's a couple of other things that I think we need to do once we've done the validation stuff and the explaining stuff. We want to acknowledge differences. In other words, we're saying, do you know what I think is age appropriate and what your friends' parents think is age appropriate are going to be totally different. Somebody in the Facebook group said, I don't want my kids watching Harry Potter until they're a certain age. We've been through this just with our kids and their cousins. Their cousins have been allowed to watch almost anything. And we're kind of like, you're not watching that until you're 17. And their kids have been watching it years earlier. So we just pretty much say everyone has different rules because everyone's version of what's okay, what's safe, what's healthy it's going to be different. I also think it's worth highlighting that your children are only thinking about the parents that are going easier on their kids than you're going on them. And so there's always going to be stricter parents out there as well. You can say, it feels like you're the only one, but I guarantee there's a bunch of parents who are stricter than me as well.
I think this is where building relationships with your kids' friends' parents makes a difference, because you actually find out that the things your children keep pushing against and saying, but my friends all get to do it. Once you start having conversations with other parents, you realize that you're actually not on your own.
Yeah.
More times than not, there's maybe one person in the group that's allowed to do something more than everybody else, and everyone's going home and having the same conversation with their parents.
And everyone pushes to get to that level. I think it's also worth pointing out, hey, you know what? Are you allowed to do things now that you weren't allowed to do a year ago? Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So in this family, we do loosen up the rules as you get older, but you've got to be mature enough and ready. And I promise you, the opportunity to do this is coming. We're just not there yet. And then the golden question is, so what do you think we should do? Let's come up with a solution that we can all feel good about. And our effort here is that we've explored what's going on, we've explained our expectations, and now we're empowering our children to develop a way forward in collaboration with us. Someone on Facebook said that they get their kids to put together a business case or a strategy to move the conversation forward. It's the same thing. This is an empowerment thing where the kids have got to think through, how do I get the thing that I want in a way that keeps me safe and healthy so my parents are cool with it? The one thing I'll say on this is sometimes you just got to stand firm. Sometimes shifting position is going to be helpful and healthy, and other times there is just no way that any change can occur. And as the parent, you have got to be discerning. You've got to be strong.
For me, I think the most important thing out of all of this is that if we're going to engage in this kind of conversation with our children, we actually need to be open to hearing what they have to say, because there are going to be times where our kids are going to give us an argument that actually makes a whole heap of sense.
Yeah.
And if we're open to it, we can actually work with them to come up with a solution that's better than the one we had previously, because we've done it collaboratively with them.
It looks so good and sounds so good and feels so good when, as a child, you make an argument and your parents who disagree with you look at you and say, that's a really good point. it really builds trust. It builds all the stuff into the relationship that you need, so the kids feel connection and they know that you're actually working with them and for them. And I think
it's about feeling like they're in a democracy as opposed to a dictatorship. Sometimes we have to come down hard and we have to stand firm, but there are going to be lots of times in our relationship where we can actually give a little.
So to our anonymous emailer, we hope that these ideas give you some ideas for how to talk with your children about it's not fair, how come they can do it and I can't do it. There is a strong chance, I just have to acknowledge the reality, there is a very strong chance that if you go through a conversation like this, that your child might resent you for having firm boundaries. But sometimes, as a parent, that's what's required. Sometimes that's what we have to do. If we do it in autonomy-supportive ways, which is what we've talked about in this podcast, we'll increase the chances that the kids are going to, quote-unquote, get it, even if it takes until they're in their 20s. They will get it eventually, and I'll thank you for it one day. Just don't tell them that they will. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. For more information about how to make your family happier, please visit us at happyfamilies.com.au. Tomorrow on the podcast, we're talking with Dr. Amantha Imber about her brand new book, The Health Habit, and how, as we dive into the new year and really fire things up, we can get our lives totally on track health-wise. Can't wait for that conversation on the Happy Families podcast.